Welcome, welcome to another episode of the Impact of AI and Big Data, sponsored by WILDA, Women Leaders in Data and Artificial Intelligence. Each week we explore how data and artificial intelligence really impacts us both personally and professionally. This week, our guest is Laura Miller. She's the Director of Ethics, Integrity, and Technology for Shadowweight AI, but she's also an applied ethics instructor, not only at Webster University, but also St. Louis Community College, Southwestern Illinois College, just to name a few. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you for
Good.
joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
When you and I connected, what drew me to you was you're all about ethics. And
Yes.
I think some of the things that we had talked about, earlier was there are people talking about ethics, bits and pieces. We talk a little
Yes.
bit about bias, we talk a little bit about the human experience, but you not only are doing this full time as a job, but you're also teaching it, and not just at several, you're teaching it in multiple, universities and colleges within the Illinois area.
True, very much true. One of the things that I love about ethics is that it is so um, expansive. It can cover so many different areas. It's not just one thing. It can overlap so many things from anything war to medicine to AI
Mhm.
and everything in between, even fintech. So it's quite a diverse field, and there is so much that we could talk about as it relates to it.
You did not start out in ethics.
Well, I started out in ethics more broadly,
Okay.
kind of. But actually, I started out as an artist doing cultural projects for State Farm, which is a Fortune 100 company.
Mhm.
And what I got all the rogue projects. We don't know who should do this project. Open your mind, gender, race, and age. Who are we going to give that to?
Mhm.
And I was always drawn to those kinds of questions that didn't have answers. It's funny, my mom still jokes that if she knew that questions that didn't have answers were an actual college major, she would have known what I was supposed to be long ago. Well, imagine everyone's surprise when that home for those unanswered questions is actually in philosophy. So after I had my adventure at State Farm and my adventure in launching my own business, when I returned to school, I initially went in for art. And they're like, oh, no, no. We try to get majors to leave with a portfolio to get the jobs you've already had.
Mhm.
So, no, you don't need to be here. So then I was like, oh, maybe art history, because I still thought that art was where I was supposed to be. And it was interesting that when that major kind of fell apart, mainly because I couldn't meet classes and there were snow days and very strict attendance requirements, and I was now a single mom going back to school. I was looking for an elective, and my advisor was looking, and she was thumbing through classes, and she's like, "Oh, philosophy, nobody wants those." And she starts, scrolling through them fast. I'm like, "Wait, hold up. I love those classes. I took some of those mixed in with my art classes."
Mhm.
Long story short, I took philosophy classes in ethics and then received a letter from my department saying, hey, had you considered majoring in philosophy and ethics? And of course, I responded to that with Monty Python's Philosopher's Song YouTube link in the email. And they let me major in philosophy. And it's been a love of ethics and culture and understanding people and the impacts of our choices on people the whole time. I
For
just thought it was the art.
Yeah, for those just listening and not watching the video, Laura is smiling the entire time that she talks about ethics, which is, I would say, not a very common response.
No, it probably isn't. Most people are probably very serious and consider it a very morose kind of,
Mhm.
troubling thing when we look at all the problems of the world. But when I look at things, and I made a post about this recently about AI optimism, so many people are focused on how badly things can go, and they
Mhm.
can. And make no mistake, I have no rose-colored glasses, mine are blue. But I can see the benefits of it, and I can see the potential that it has to be good
Mhm.
if we can just keep the guardrails. And if we can keep those guardrails, we can have a world like we deserve and we've earned
Mhm.
without so much of the bad. But we have to tend to the not good to get to the good.
So before we dive into that, because I think that is really where the heart of this conversation is going to go, what is just the baseline definition of ethics so that everyone is listening and we're all on the same page?
Well, I think that people could define it differently.
Hmm.
Usually, how we look at it is we look at it as kind of the guidelines or process. I kind of consider it guardrails that we use to make decisions that don't have easy answers and that instead address things that are things like good versus bad, right versus wrong, but not necessarily legal versus illegal.
Hmm.
Ethics isn't law. Although we make very good attorneys because we understand how to make persuasive arguments, but instead we focus on good, right, fair, and just. So those questions that aren't easily answered with a yes or no, or this is illegal or not legal,
Hmm.
or illegal or legal, instead we focus on what was the right thing to do, the best thing to do, the good thing to do. And that's where ethics is home.
And if we take that definition of ethics and then apply that to artificial intelligence technologies,
Yes.
now AI technologies have been around for some
Mhm.
time. I personally was writing, AI models, with
Yes,
around 2004, but it wasn't, I think, within the last 5 years that
for
data
sure.
was becoming more accessible, technologies were becoming more accessible, and suddenly this conversation of ethics and guardrails became much more prevalent. Is that
Yes.
around the right time frame, or were you seeing something sooner or later?
I think ethics has always been concerned with technology. It
Mm,
just always has. There's no way to escape that. But for it to become mainstream, yes, I would say about 5 years ago is when people outside of academia and outside of tech started to kind of take note and scratch their heads and start going, hey, what are those people up to? What are they actually doing? And what kind of impact on my life is this actually going to have?
mhm,
What is this going to do to my world? I think that was about 5 years ago. Philosophers have long since argued about whether or not, and by the way, ethics is home in philosophy. That's where its academic major is.
mhm,
Philosophers have long since wondered about the power of the human mind, about what it means to think, about what it means to is, to be, and to be part. Heidegger talks about design. And when he says design, he talks about what it means to be a human being with being in the world. So we've long since wondered what it means to be human in a human world and what technology would do to us, for us, or with us in this
mhm.
world. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago that everyone else kind of went, oh my gosh, it's here. And now what? And that's when we started really having things not only accessible, but inexpensive enough to make them very accessible. There are at least, I don't know, on a quick perusal, 10 or 20 free data sets, giant data sets out there that you can have that cost nothing.
Hmm.
Now that we have that kind of data at our fingertips and you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars, what are people going to do with it? And that's when the world opened up.
And that's where your voice was much louder,
Yes,
more
so that's
heard.
when
Yeah.
well, that's when the impact, if you remember when I said I began with projects that impacted people, like Open Your Mind, Gender, Race, and Age.
Hmm.
So what is technology going to do in those spheres and to those people that are in those groups? What is going to happen to people in developing nations? What's going to happen to people with disabilities? What's going to happen? What's this going to do? What's its impact going to be?
Right.
And that's where I live.
I did look at some of the previous content that you've discussed recently
Mhm.
this year. And I think where, a lot of times people see the word ethics and play out with technology is this moral dilemma. For
Yes.
example, we know that, through some of the more public displays of where some AI went wrong, individuals were not getting the loans because there were some discrepancies in how the data was being used. Decisions were being made around resumes. There's a lot of those out there, but you also went a little further around moral decisions and moral consequences in law enforcement and judicial proceedings and public surveillance.
Yes. because it is about the impact of people. And as I mentioned, philosophy does overlap with law. We do
Mhm.
understand policy, law, codifying regulations, and all of those good things. But we're starting to see places like courts start to use computers to try to generate, say, prison sentences in a hope to overcome bias.
Hmm.
However, what's often missed, and it was one of my more popular posts, was the fact that the bias that exists, well, that there is bias that exists in data, and that it comes from us. So if you turn to a computer and ask it what this prison recommendation should be, it's going to hold the same bias that the people had that affected the record to be generated to begin with. So it doesn't necessarily help you escape bias. What computer or what technology does best is reveal to us through a mirror what our actual world looks like. We keep wanting to clean up the data and make it pretty, but
Mhm.
the unclean data is our truest mirror to what society looks like as a whole and what its frailties and its weaknesses and biases are. And it's
I'd like,
undiluted.
yeah, I'd like to. You mentioned the mirror, and I've recently, because I've been reading a lot of your material lately around the broken mirror theory, which I hadn't really known a lot about. But you say that you've put a lot of thought into this, which is great. I'm glad somebody out there is. But your observations around the broken mirror theory is a bit different than maybe how it's played out in the past.
I think that there's a perception amongst people that because we have people that need to clean data, and we use people to clean data, and we
Mhm.
do, data scientists are very good at that, that somehow it means that the algorithm has gone wrong, that somehow the data that's compiled is error filled. And the trick is the data itself is data. It's impartial. It doesn't have an opinion. It's not a person. We anthropomorphize it way too much, which is to
Mhm.
give something that's not human like qualities. And we shouldn't do that with data. So when I talk about the broken mirror theory, which is my theory, which is why you might not have heard of it,
Mm.
is the idea that the data is what it is. When algorithms come up with troubling answers or solutions or recommendations, it's because there is that information that leads it there in the data set. How did it get in the data set? Us. We're responsible for the data set. Everything we post online, every comment, every website that we use, every personal opinion we type on LinkedIn becomes part of a data set somewhere. Now, as you might imagine, there are a number of different voices with very different opinions all over the world. If you put them together in a pile, just kind of like gathering them together in a data set, there will be themes within that set. And they might not be the feel good, happy themes that lead you to smile. They
Mhm.
can be troubling, they can be disturbing, they can be biased, they can be racist, they can be many, many bad things. But it is a true reflection of kind of the pulse of that data set. So if we're having a problem with bias or racism or other challenges against the disabled or other persons when it comes to fair treatment, it's because we actually have those biases in our society and they exist. So if we want to clean things, we can clean the data so we can get a better answer and we can still use technology to help us. But if we really want to fix the data, we have to fix ourselves. It's our reflection. And if we don't like the way that we look or my hair, we should fix it. But we shouldn't get a new mirror or assume that if I just apply a filter to my image on this video, that somehow I'll look different in real life. In real life, I'll still be me. And the data is still going to reveal truths about us, whether we like it or not, that are still going to be there, no matter how pretty we make the data set look. The algorithm isn't broken, we are.
So there's two aspects of this process. There's the data collection,
Yes.
and through that process, it's the collection, it's the formatting, it's the harmonizing, it's the cleansing. Sometimes it's the enrichment. There's, at some conversations within bias, it's well, making sure that we're fully transparent, we have a fact sheet, because we may
Right.
not have collected all the data geographically that covers, the challenge that we're trying to solve. So that's a little bit more, I think, what I'm saying, straightforward, a little bit more tactical.
Right.
But
Well,
then the second phase, oh, go ahead.
no, I was waiting to hear the second phase.
Oh, okay. So the second phase is where I think sounds like you're more focused is we've got the test data in there. We're running the AI, we've got developers creating the models. We're running those models. And that's typically where I see maybe a lot more of the conversation around bias. It's the individual interpreting the data is interpreting it based on their own broad or narrow view of how they've experienced society.
Well, I think maybe a hybrid. Um, what happens is when we make data, when we create data,
Mhm.
we just put our opinions out there. Even this is going to become data. We'll be part of the data set.
Mhm.
So my views will be out there in front of the data set, and so will yours. Same thing happens when we type and when we do everything else. When people gather a data set, they hope that it's randomized in a way that you can get a good cross section of views. And the aim is to do that. And we do understand from a scientific point of view why it's valid and important to do that, so that you can ensure that there isn't one overarching view or theme that seems dominant. If you ask certain demographics, certain questions, you can expect certain answers. And we understand that. So we try to create our data sets to avoid that. The challenge that we're running into is that even if we run our data sets to do that, we're still getting those threads and those themes
Mhm.
even when it seems like it's random. And then people are wondering, well, it was the algorithm that did it because we thought we had this randomized set. And what I'm supposing or proposing is that we did have a randomized set, but even within a randomized set, you can still find themes and threads that are consistent, that are pervasive, that are there even among randomized data. Now, we can keep randomizing the data, which is what is an approach under data science to clean data and say, okay, well, what if we shuffle out these? What if we shuffle in more of this? What if we do this, that, and the other? Can we get less biased answers? And we can tweak it and augment it so that we can get less biased answers. Yes. But those biases are still there and we're still working against them because we're still putting them out there and they're still ending up in the data sets, even when they're diverse.
So does an ethicist have an approach for how to overcome these?
Well, yeah, and when it comes to what do we do about that as an ethicist, it's
Mhm.
first of all, we have to still insist that we do use data that is randomized, that you should not default and lean into your own biases. And let's face it, data scientists have biases too. They're human. So we can't overlook that either. But what we can do is we can look at the harm that is caused when an algorithm gives a wrong answer, and we can put in policies, guardrails, certain expectations for randomization, and guidelines in order to try to ensure the most diverse set that we can get.
Mhm.
So we can do things to make it better, but I still insist that there is value in the unclean data in where we actually are in the world. Because I can put on makeup and look completely different than I do today. Okay. And I can have good hair days and bad hair days. But in the end, when you see me when I wake up in the morning, that is probably the truest view of who I am. And we need to see data in the same way, that in its messiness and its aggregate and the way that it comes together, we can still see a portrait of ourselves and then decide if we want to do the work to change what that portrait looks like. Because we still can get haircuts and put on makeup and fix it to a certain extent. But as an ethicist, what I would want to see is the change in society. I would want to see us do better as people and put less effort. Well, sure, we're always going to need it, but we could be cleaning up different problems in our data if we were willing to do the work as people. And we've seen that in performative efforts in DEI. We've seen that in greenwashing when it comes to the environment. We've
Mhm.
seen it in ethics because we're now talking in my field about ethics washing. We always want the pretty version without the work.
Hmm.
And as an ethicist, we really do have to do the work at some point in time. And we're being called to do it. We're having it pointed out to us. It's literally in the data in black and white. And we still go, but maybe we can make it prettier. But this is our world, and there's no LinkedIn filter or camera filter that's going to do the work without us doing it too.
You know, I never thought about this until just now, but when I went to college at Auburn University, and it was a requirement to take a statistics class.
Mhm.
And I never thought I would like statistics, but it ended up being all about data. And one of the requirements was to read a book called How to Lie with Statistics.
Yes.
And the book primarily was focused on, you can have all this data, but how you massage it and how you present it and the story you tell about it can actually tell you one thing. Whereas
Yes.
that same set of data with a little bit of different massaging and a little bit different storytelling can
Yes.
actually come and tell you something completely different.
Indeed.
And
Yes.
that was such a light bulb
Mind.
moment, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there's a great book. It's called Merchants of Doubt.
Okay.
It has to do with scientists actually, well, just one case that comes to mind has to do with scientists testifying before Congress that cigarettes did not have an impact in cancer rates. And they testified before Congress and they had data to back them up.
Mm, wow.
There's a
That's,
whole book, there's a whole book on it.
I will definitely have to look into that
Yes, it's a
now.
very,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
very, very cool book. And
Mm,
actually it was shared with me by a scientist who was like, like when it comes to data, you have to know where it comes from. You have to know what the parameters were for it.
mhm.
Where did they set the guardrails when they pulled it? Because you can make anything look almost like anything if you want to.
And
Data works that way.
this is where in the industry we advocate that there has to be a fact sheet, that and maybe it doesn't go as far as I think what you're illustrating, but the fact sheet is supposed to tell you what data sources did we pull, what data sources did we not pull, more
Yes.
transparency into the data so
Yes.
that you're not just looking at it on the surface, you actually understand what went on behind the scenes.
Well, and that's the same deal with scientific studies. I mean, if you look at scientific evidence and you're like, oh, this is a great article, did you scroll down and look and see where the sources came from? Did you see who was actually pulled into the dialogue that led to it? Do
Mhm.
you know who those contributors were? And for some certain interventions, do you know who paid for them?
Yes. Um, so
Because
if I think about the transparency and the fact sheet,
Mhm.
from what you're talking about today, what are some other areas that maybe I'm missing in communicating the back end of what's going on?
Well, as I say, transparency is essential, knowing not only where you pulled your data from, because right now, as you know, or you probably know, artists are absolutely revolting over the fact that their work, which might be copywritten, has been included in data sets to train AI art generators. And the
Okay.
work is copywritten. And there isn't a lot of information available about where those data sets were to even figure out if your artwork, including mine, because I have artwork out there,
Mhm.
um, whether or not it's been pulled in or not, and I just haven't seen it published somewhere. And the onus through many of the terms and conditions policies on the AI art generation sites basically say anything you create on our site, we consider yours, but by the way, it might violate copyright and you should be careful of that. I think we need to do better when it comes to regulation. I think we need to do better when it comes to setting expectations. And I think we need to be really clear in our terms and conditions about what data sets we're using, where we're harvesting information from,
Mhm.
and that we've kicked the tires. One of the things I work on with shadowing is their terms and conditions, but not just that, but their FAQs too, that make it a lot more transparent, readable, in common everyday language. Don't write it so that it's full of gobbledygook that
Mhm.
nobody could understand without a college degree in philosophy. Write it so that the people using the site understand what's going on. Transparency isn't just, well, we told you what we were doing. It's
Mhm.
telling people what you're doing in such a way that their understanding of it is clear. It's literally, it's honesty, and that is a moral or an ethical condition. It's not sharing information with the intention to divert, dissuade, or any of the other, D words to get people away from what is the actual truth of the matter. Put it out there and own your truth. So I think we need to take transparency a lot farther than we have. I
Mhm.
think we need stronger regulations. The Copyright Act that is now front and center of the AI art debate was written in 1976.
Mhm.
It's long overdue, but it is usually the case, and I've made comments like this on many of the AI art posts. Regulations come after innovation, and that's one of our challenges, which is we innovate and then all of a sudden we find ourselves backed into a corner. But now that all of technology, for lack of a better word, it's become agile,
Mhm.
we need to start putting our own effort into our policies for our bootstraps, our startups. We need to make sure that there's ethics supports for the up and coming AI companies, as well as for the larger companies who can support ethics or hire consultants who can help them, but who are helping the bootstraps, who are helping the people coming up who are in their Series A and Series B funding.
Mhm.
Where are the ethicists involved in that process? Because they still need them. And as we've seen from many of the AI gone wrong media, it's very bad reputationally in this environment to make costly mistakes. Fortnite just got a heavy fine levied against them. Wells Fargo just got a heavy fine levied against them. It's time to not only do business, but it's time to do it right. And when
Mm.
you talk about right and wrong, you're talking ethically. It's not just about doing business anymore. It's
Right.
about doing ethics.
You've mentioned several times throughout this conversation the word regulations and the word policies. I
Yes.
I want to shift a bit more to the policy side.
Sure.
Um, I often have seen policies or individuals write policies, but I always find that the policy's written and it's not, either it's missing information, like
Mhm.
I wrote the policy but I didn't put consequences, or I wrote the policy and I didn't distribute it so everybody could read it.
Yes.
I don't monitor it, so what was the point of writing the policy to begin with? But
Right.
when it comes to everything that we've talked about here, technology is moving so much more faster. We talk
Yes.
about 5 years ago, but in 5 years from now, we're going to be working with technologies that didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
And I look at the individuals that are in an organization right now, and even that is, oh, let's go write a policy after the fact. So
Mhm.
is it time for organizations to have dedicated resources that can stay up to speed with how they're being impacted with all this technology? Because it feels like these policies are going to need to be adjusted much more frequently.
Policies are gonna be adjusted ongoing. For instance, shadowing AI right now is operational in something like 75 different countries. We use natural language processing to make our training available in people's natural language
Mhm.
so that they can do the training and they're practicing using their natural language, which is an easier way for people to learn rather than try to struggle with another language and new concepts both. But look, the EU AI Act is being finalized as we speak. Right now, my company is in 75 different countries. Am I absolutely perusing every version of the AI Act that comes out? Absolutely. How do I design policies to function in a kind of non-regulated, regulated world where the EU has regulations and by and large, the rest is a sandbox without any rules?
Mhm.
I build to the strict. When I write my policies, I write my policies based on the strictest policy that I can find relating to what we do, because I will always be compliant with those who are most strict, and I will be over and above the other people playing in the sandbox who have no rules. But you have to build, excuse me, you have to build to the most strict, and you have to be willing to rewrite those policies. If suddenly another state in the United States writes, say, a privacy policy that is more strict than the EU AI Act, I have to change my privacy policy.
Mhm.
Absolutely. and it has to be able to be done on demand. You can't just say once a year, we'll look at these policies. You have to say that you're going to review them ongoing, and even as you review them, that you will make necessary changes as needed or even voluntarily. And that's where I'd really like us to see,
Mhm.
excuse me, is to see us actually voluntarily make revisions to policies as often as every quarter and on demand as needed. But that means that you need a policy person on demand.
I was just about to say, if I'm listening to this, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, how many people, Laura, do you have on your team to be able to do this? And how many people would I need in my organization to focus on this? Because at the moment, there's not a policy group. Let's look at
Well,
the
it's supposed
procurement
to be,
organization. Procurement organization has a governance team that has a person that may or may not be supporting some policies, but only if they're being directed to do so.
yes,
Um,
when you
yeah.
talk about policy making and you talk about ethics in business, and in an ideal world, you would actually have a director of ethics and you would have an ethics committee beneath you, and it would be full of diverse voices, not just your own and
Mhm.
not just somebody from C-suite. We're talking employee resource groups, we're talking um, directors, we're talking team leaders, we're talking design thinkers, we're talking a diverse group of people who can really look at these impacts and play them one against the other and start looking at where the impact's going to be, where's the reputational hit going to be. But I don't want us to just focus on ethics as how much bad can we prevent.
Mhm.
After we prevent the bad, as much of it as we can, as much as we can identify that we can stop, what can you do to add to the good? Because you should be doing that too. But in order to do that, you actually need an ethics group, and very few organizations, if any, have them. Now, shadowing AI is a bootstrap startup. So by and large, I am the ethics
Mhm.
director of ethics. However, we do have teammates in different countries that I can reach out to. And one of the things that I will tout for shadowing, hands down, is we have an incredibly accessible CEO who, like, I don't even have to necessarily, I mean, I always give him good reasons, but I don't have to give him a sales pitch. He believes in doing the right things and he wants his AI to do good. He doesn't want to get in trouble or do the wrong thing or face some kind of horrific backlash.
Mhm.
And I think that there are a lot of bootstraps and a lot of earlier startups that feel the same way. But can they accidentally bump into me or someone like me? Not necessarily. That's one of the reasons why I started building in public,
Mhm.
is because there are people like me out there and we would be willing to help. But we need you to find us and we need to find you. That doesn't leave the larger companies off the hook. But yes, everyone should be looking at an ethics panel or an ethics group at their organization. I know many Fortune companies or companies large enough to be on the Fortune list if they're not publicly
Mhm.
traded. Um, and they're hiring exponentially in tech, but there's no ethics positions, there's no governance positions, there's no ethics and governance positions. Instead, there's just this boom in technology, but there's no one looking for the guardrails, and it's way too easy to go off the cliff.
So at one point in this conversation, I was thinking, gosh, is everybody, similar to like data literacy, is everybody in the company going to not, need to have at least some form of ethics literacy?
Uh-huh.
But are you saying that?
No,
No. Okay.
I'm saying what you need to know to do ethics is right, good, fair, and just. And you don't need a degree to do that. Now, you might need a degree, which I have, in order to make it actionable, in
Mhm.
order to what we call operationalize ethics, which is to figure out a way to do it systematically, consistently, and in enough time to offset the harms that could follow, whether to your own business or to your users. You
Mhm.
do need somebody with that skill set. But no, I want people without ethics degrees on ethics panels. I want them to tell me how this training or this AI impacts them as a person, because ultimately that's what it's about. We're trying, I would like to think, in AI to make our world a better world
Mhm.
and to help or allow technology to benefit us in what I would consider, and very few people use this term, in a friendly way. I refer to responsible AI as friendly AI. It's like a partner in crime, but doing good for you. I want to see AI like that. Now, it's harder to picture that as much but you can, even in the defense industry.
Mhm.
But if we think about it that way, then we have to involve the voices that are impacted. It can't just be some high upper echelon CEO task. It has to actually work its way through everyone. So you need everyone on that group. And you can even rotate members of that group. I'm a fan of that because I'm also not a fan of unpaid work, and many people on ERGs are unpaid. And I don't want to promote that. But if somebody can work on this project, and then for the next project, you get a whole new team together and a whole new set of voices, I like that. And I think that's beneficial.
So Laura, as we start to wrap up, I want to ask, I'm thinking about the folks, listening to this. What is something that you can offer as a recommendation or advice for someone listening who wants to start but doesn't know where to start? What's one thing or a couple things that they could do over the next, couple months that could get them moving in the right direction?
Let's see. There's a few things that I would recommend. First, one
Okay.
of the things that I would recommend, and this is kind of on the same vein, but a little bit different, but I want to make sure I put out there, is people should really be considering what their own personal privacy policy would look like.
Hmm.
Pay attention to where your data is. Pay attention to what you're putting out there and what data is available about you, and in particular about your children. There have been a lot of blowbacks about policies or companies bypassing policies, and there being harms regarding children, selling to children, those kinds of things. But
Okay.
also for you, I used an example on one of my posts. If you stop at a stoplight and there's a camera there,
Hmm.
that camera now has a picture of you, but can also identify what car you drive, what age the car is, what road you're on, what neighborhood you were in, what time you were traveling. Records aren't just the record of the obvious thing that they appear to be. So you're driving on a street and you're thinking, oh, it's a record of my driving. They can tell if you've got a Starbucks in your hand
I,
when they
I read that post and I thought about that. I'm like,
yeah.
yep,
So
yep.
we need to be thinking of personal privacy policies.
Hmm.
The other thing that I encourage is start following if you're on LinkedIn, start following some of the hashtags that have ethics in them, ethical AI or AI ethics. Start reading some of the posts, start asking some of the questions. If you want to do something that is more direct, start questioning or start reading the actual privacy policies. Don't just get the cookies warning and click I accept so it goes
Hmm.
away. Scroll to whatever you wanted to see. Pay attention to exactly how often you're being asked for information and what kind of information it is. And if you're really comfortable about that, there is power in your no. There isn't as much power in your yes. So you have to know what your own guardrails and limits are. You have to start thinking about your part in contributing to the data set, all of them, because you're in them already. So what information have you put out there? What information have you given people to work with? What's what are you contributing to this? Because
Hmm.
you are. And then I will tell you, the artists did a great job. They galvanized together and they have actually created enough of a disturbance that some of the AI art generators are now allowing artists to find ways to opt out of having their work included in the data set that trains the AI art generators. So
Which
there is,
theoretically you think would make just normal sense. If I'm
well,
using your data, I should get you to opt in, opt out, right?
I was going to say, you would think that would be common sense, but
Hmm.
the way that data comes together, you pull it together from multiple sources, or you contact a data company who's pulled it together from multiple sources. Then you pull it into yours,
Hmm.
right? Your product. Then people type in prompts, which pull certain random records of that. Then it creates artwork, and somebody goes, oh, that resembles mine. did you get it from? How do you even answer?
I was just about to say, based on that scenario, I wouldn't even know where to start. Yeah.
That's why they're trying to get at it from the back door, which is if the
Right.
artists tell us to leave their work out, we can at least put that out there as a parameter that says no work from this person
Mhm.
or not this work. But I've also advocated that people start actually putting the copyright symbol, their name, and their year, even if it's very small, in one of the corners of any work that they publish online. Because even the images that you post, say on LinkedIn, Facebook, online, wherever, even if it's a family photo,
Mhm.
we don't tend to put copyright messages on those.
Mm.
And now you put them in the public domain and they're scrolling all those sites looking for images. Think about what's out there and what you've contributed. It's a big deal.
Wow.
We are product, not the consumer.
I
All of us, our lives are the products.
I didn't think that an ethics conversation would be this exciting for me.
I love ethics. I have fun. I nerd out with it. But it's powerful.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. But you know, my advice, I guess, overall would be it's time to engage. It's not time to just allow technology to passively do with your data or your life or your
Mhm.
career or anything that you don't want it to. But also, the time is now for you to be able to wield technology to do all of the things you always wish it could. I
I think
have
that's a perfect
I
takeaway.
have an almost nonverbal goddaughter who now could tell me stories using Jasper or even Tom. There's different AIs,
Mhm.
but it can unlock her world for her mother and for those who love her. Don't forget the good just because you see all the bad. And believe me, there's plenty you'll see. But don't forget the good and don't be passive. You play an active role in this, whether you've known it or not, you've been in it all along.
Oh, I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation. That's a
Well, I'm
very
glad that it
powerful
went well.
message. At the very end, the most powerful message is we've been doing this all along. We've just never stopped to ask. And I think that's really I think that's my biggest takeaway at the moment is wow, I need to step back and really look at this a little bit more differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's time we saw some things differently.
Laura, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been nice to be here.